Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Thanks for joining us for episode 328. As we begin, think about this. Your manager is preoccupied with something. What is it exactly? Is it following the rules, aligning with the mission of the company, or pursuing power? The answer will impact both your experience and the experience of your greater team. Joseph Griffiths is back with us this week to share his perspective on this topic and a little more about life as a people manager. If you missed part one of our discussion with Joseph in episode 327, we talked about his role change from solutions architect to business solution strategist and how that forced him to learn how to communicate effectively with executives. We dove into how Joseph gained clarity on his passion areas and how he uncovered that they actually aligned to a role in people management. We also talked about that management interview process and what it was like to lead a team that were once coworkers. This week in part two of our discussion with Joseph, we're going to talk about how to have effective one-on-ones with your manager and your skip level manager. We'll hear some observations from Joseph from working with both sales engineers or his technical team as a manager and salespeople. And in addition to the culture topic I mentioned above, how do you focus and prioritize properly as a manager? That's a tough one, and it involves setting a lot of boundaries, but they need to be the right ones with the right prioritization filter applied. Let's catch the full story and get you to part two of our discussion with Joseph Griffiths. Let's take it this way, Joseph. One-on-ones. If I'm an individual contributor who's maybe not used to one-on-ones or doesn't quite understand how I should be leveraging them, what would you tell me?
So let's talk theory and step away from the way that I did it because I may have not done as well as the theory. Look, the theory is we're all people and we're all humans and everyone appreciates a human perspective, right? If I, as a manager, come to the table and say, here's my agenda for the one-on-one that I expect you to do every week, it's going to be real hard to come to me and be honest about the things you're struggling with. It's really, really hard to talk to someone who's only business. As a manager, it's a lot easier if I just keep it business because then if issues happen or stuff, it's less emotional entanglement. But I think it's the wrong way to do it. My job is to serve the people. My goal for one-on-one was first, breed trust and comfort. Secondarily, allow you or the individual that I'm in a one-on-one with to tell me what they need help with, to be honest about the challenges. And once in a while, to deliver information that needed to be delivered in a one-on-one, right? Sometimes there's information that needs to be delivered, like this is going to be our change in compensation plan or something, right? That needs to be one-on-one. I generally had one thing that I wanted to cover per one-on-one. One thing that I had on my list. You'll recognize that, Nick, because we always said, okay, I want to get through your list first, Nick, and then we'll get through my list, right?
That's right.
Specifically speaking, if you as an individual contributor trying to prepare to make that a meaningful session, spend 5 minutes before thinking about not what's top of mind right now, but what's the overarching challenge, right? Because it's very easy to walk into there and come out of a bad meeting the hour before and go, I just had a horrible meeting and this is why. But is that really the problem? Or should we be talking about something that's bigger or wider or more challenging? I think spending 5 minutes preparing with a OneNote sheet or a notepad or whatever and just writing down, these are the three things that I want to talk about and I need either some guidance for them or I need you to knock down a wall. That's another one. Ask your manager to knock down a wall. And the problem is you got to kind of feel that out with your manager because every manager is different, Nick. The other thing that is interesting to me as a manager that you can bring to the table is ideation, things you're thinking about doing that may improve the business help. I love those when people would bring ideation to me because that's something I can get behind, support, and give you greater visibility with. You have an idea that's unique, special. Not only is it a good idea because it's your idea, it's also something you're likely to spend extra energy on because you're passionate about. And I want to support that and promote it up to my leader or my leader's leader, because that makes me look good, but also makes you look good as the individual. And that's something I wanted to do regularly. So that's the other thing I'd bring to the table is ideation like that. As a manager, it's easy to bring all your problems to the table. People always tell you their problems, right? And a lot of them you're powerless to say, but sometimes people bring their ideas to solve problems. That's even better.
100%. I would just say if you're listening to this and you're not taking advantage of those one-on-ones to get out of the details a little bit and think at the higher level problem, it's a great exercise. I don't always do it. I don't always do it very well, but every now and then, it's something we could all use more practice on. Because I imagine, even as a manager, you have to do the same thing when you're communicating with your manager and think one level higher. What's the problem within this organization wide, not just my team, right?
A friend of mine who's the CEO of a corporation told me once that his favorite day was Friday. And I said, why? And he said, because at noon on Friday, I go to lunch with my team. And then I go back to my office. I grab a pad of paper and a pencil. I turn off my cell phone and I go to a park nearby and sit on a bench. And for the next 3 hours, I think about my business. And things that come to me, I write on my pad of paper. I then go home. Monday morning, I get out my pad of paper and I start executing off of the things I thought of. I think we could all benefit from turning off the notifiers, turning off the noise, and spending an hour just thinking about where we are and actually making some plans. That proactivity is missing because the notifiers in the world that we live in are, very dopamine driven by trying to get you to react. That proactivity is what makes him a great CEO. I literally just go to a park bench and sit there and watch the birds and think about the business. So I think you've hit it on the head, which is it's very easy to be overly busy. Another people leader I knew for many years who now works at AWS told me that busy is the new stupid. At the time, I didn't understand it. I was like, you must be crazy. I don't understand it. I totally understand it now. We get so busy that we're reacting to everything that we don't take time to think, and then we don't prioritize the most important activities. So I would just suggest that, before you go to one-on-one, take that 5 minutes, take that 10 minutes. Think about it that one level up. Think about what you want to say. Not because one-on-one is going to make or change your career. It's not. If your manager is going to kill you because of one-on-one, you got the wrong manager. I'm sorry. It's just the wrong situation, right? But it's an opportunity to expand influence. Take advantage of it.
And if I'm going to have a one-on-one with my skip level manager, for example, how would I approach that differently? Or would I approach it the same way?
2 things. They're people. You want to get a human connection with them. Just like a customer. When you're working with a client or customer, you want to have a human connection. Something that connects them to, say, the sports team they like or whatever it is. Some connection. You want to have some sort of human connection because that allows you to get in the door more often in the future. Second thing you want out of that is you don't want to stand around and complain. Not a good move. You want to have a conversation that leaves that person thinking, this is a really smart person. This is a person who is doing really good work. So the best thing you can bring to that are stories of things that are going well with your customers and sales or going well with your job function. Those stories are going to be something that they take away from that and share with other people. You're going to be giving them value. Human connection and value are the 2 things you want to provide in that skip level.
Not a bunch of problems.
I really don't think it's a good move. I will tell you that second level of management, the one that has managers reporting to them, if you think they haven't heard it, you're kidding yourself. They've heard it all regularly. They know what's going on. They're not blind. They know exactly what's going on. They do nothing but talk about what's going on all day long. They don't even have customers to deal with half the time. They're just focused on that. So I would just encourage, don't use that. Think that's an opportunity to illustrate problems. Use that as an opportunity to provide them value and get a connection with them.
Yeah, good thoughts. If we go back for a second to your point about taking time to turn off the notifiers and focus on thinking, managers are busy. They might have their entire team ask them a question throughout the day, maybe more than one. So how do you optimize your tasks as a manager and focus on the right things? because that's something that, from my perspective, you seem to do really well. And it's still a challenge for people like me.
I have a friend who told me that he has to go on a cruise ship to get the notifiers turned off. Actually, it's his wife who told me that. I'm not going to admit to who it is, but you know who I'm talking about, Nick. So with that joke aside, good question. And here's the answer. It is really easy to get engaged in lots of things and doing lots of things okay. It's much harder to be engaged in a few things and do them spectacularly. In any company we work for, we will have millions of opportunities to do things. We need to choose to do the things that are, number one, aligned with the role that we have, aka what we're getting paid to do. And secondarily, the things that have the highest overall payoff for the effort. When I think about how to prioritize my time as a manager, we'll just pick a sales manager because that's what I was. I had a KPI, the quota. That's the only measurement that matters in sales. I can create millions of other measurements. I can create all kinds of dashboards for them, and it doesn't matter at all. Because if you're hitting quota, we're doing great. The second thing I have as a manager is a team. The third thing I have as a manager is customers, the company's customers. So I had to ask myself the question all the time, how does this help me get to the top of the mountain and hit the quota? Because in sales, there's a cadence, 13, 14-week cadence quarterly. There's activities that are regular activities, checkpoints along the way, forecast calls, all that stuff that happen as regular cadence, right? And it can get very easy to just follow the cadence like you're riding up and down a hill. And cadence is actually good. What you need to do is understand what you have to insert into the cadence to achieve the results of your KPI. So if I know that my team needs 60 days to do what they need to do to get a deal done, and we're running quarterly, I need to start that 180 days before we need to close the deal so that our stuff is done well before anyone gets into deal management, right?
Yep.
That's a cadence that I set up for myself and for my team to try to push those things early. Sales are very unpredictable, so a lot of that cadence gets thrown out the window. So at that point, you just focus on what's most important. And so for me, my first job as a manager is the people that report to me. They're the most important thing. One of the greatest things I ever experienced, I had a manager early in my days at VMware. His name was Josh Thomas. He's still with Broadcom today. I would call Josh anytime and he'd pick up the phone. And I'd say, hey, do you have a few minutes? He's like, I have as much time as you need. And he would talk to me. And sometimes it'd be 10 minutes, sometimes it'd be an hour. I was like, how do you have so much time? And he's a busy guy doing a lot of really good things. I mean, he's an incredible manager. And I came to the understanding that he just made time for the most important things, which meant sometimes he would send someone a message saying, I can't make it to this meeting because I'm doing something that's more important. Prioritize the things by importance and let the other things slide by. We all do it. I do not vacuum my floor every day. Probably needs it, but I don't do it every day. I just put up with the dirt for a couple of days, then vacuum. That's prioritizing, right?
Yep.
We all do it every single day in business. You need to prioritize by importance of how it helps you climb the hill. Whether you're an individual contributor, whether you're a manager, whether you're a VP, whether you own the company, it doesn't change. It's the reality is you need to prioritize what's most important for your job function and let people whose job it is to do the other thing, do it. Delegate and let them fail if they're going to fail at it.
Do you think maybe people are most challenged with prioritization because they lose sight of what the priorities are in the mountain of tasks that come to them? Or is it something else?
It's negative aversion. They don't like saying no. We do lose sight of the prioritization because I certainly talked about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think most of the time, the reason why we do everything and say yes to everything is because it's really hard to say no. And we're afraid that we'll be perceived in a negative light if we say no. I once had a manager when I worked at IBM named Adam Angelo. And Adam said, you need to learn the great art of saying no, however. And I was like, what is that? And he's like, it starts like this. I cannot help you with that. However, this person can, or this is the solution to that. And he said, you need to learn that because everything to you is yes, and I'll do it myself. I think that we often struggle, especially in American society, with saying no. And I don't suggest that you directly say no. I think you can be helpful without taking it on as a personal challenge. So that's my opinion. Lots of crazy science behind both sides, but basically, as a society, we are individualistic and we don't want to be seen as the one saying, no, I can't do that. We also don't want to be seen as the one that's overloaded because both of those are trigger points to saying that you're unreliable in your mind.
Right. And then you just start to have negative thoughts, which makes it harder to get things accomplished in general.
Yeah, your own internal negative thoughts, but also you're concerned about other people's negative thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're people pleasers. As a society, Americans are people pleasers.
The way some teams are structured at technology vendors is you've got a technical sales leader and a sales leader that work together. So the technical sales leader manages the sales engineers. The sales leader manages the sales people. There have been times where you've lost your partner in crime, that sales leader that was working with you, and you've kind of had to manage both teams. I'm really curious about the nuances of managing the technical side and the straight up salespeople and what you learned from that.
I have had to do that 4 times during the time that I was a manager. I was blessed every time to have great business partners that had incredible teams. And that helped a lot, right? The people I was working with were really good, really mature, and knew what they were doing. For the most part, I don't know that they needed that much management. I will leave the observation of what it is to manage a technical sales team to another question, but I'll talk about, what I observed as the differences in managing salespeople. Salespeople often are more willing to express emotion and frustration and challenge. I found most of the technical salespeople bottle it up, stuff it, go take it out some other way. It was not unusual for one of the salespeople to call me up and yell at me. I never had that experience with my technical sales team ever, right? Like, never happened to me.
Right.
They would yell at me and just need to vent the emotion. And after they get that venting of emotion out, then we could have a conversation about what the problem is and how we can fix it. The other thing I found is that when they come to you, it's usually when the mountain is about to explode with boiling hot lava. So you better do something now. With my technical team, I found that often they were letting me know long in advance of a problem. With this team, they'd call me and be like, I've been working on this for 4 weeks. It's about to explode. I'm about to lose my mind. You've got to do something about this right now. And what they needed was me say, I will take it and I will get to a solution and get them to that solution. And then they'd go back to doing their great job and taking care of everything like that for a while, but they would just hit this apex where they're about to explode. That's a little overgeneralization because everybody's a different person. But I also found that they were experts at using manipulation and emotion to get what they need because it's part of negotiation. To them, they saw every conversation as a negotiation. My technical team never saw it as a negotiation. They always saw it as a negotiation, which is good. That's their main job. They're really good negotiators, right?
Sure.
And it took me a little off guard at first to get used to the idea that they were working with me in terms of a negotiation. After I got used to that, I was like, okay, I understand what we're doing here, right? And it's okay. That's just my limited experience observations. I loved working with sellers. I have so much respect for them because they do some of the hardest jobs. They find 999 no's before they find a yes. Yet they get up every morning and go find that yes. And they get up every morning and keep pushing. And they get up and get in the face of customers who are ignoring them and make it a priority that they get that meeting. And I couldn't be more proud of the people that I've worked with in how hard that is to do every day because I can't do it every day, but they did it. They're amazing, amazing people. Probably the most resilient people we'll meet on this earth are salespeople. I don't know anybody else who can get beat up that much on a regular basis from both directions, both their management and their customers, and still keep getting up every morning, but they do it.
So contrast that with the nuances of managing technical people.
Yeah. Like I said, that I didn't find that my technical team spent a lot of time bringing problems to me in an emotional state. It was more like, let me communicate the logical problem here. Often they would say, let me tell you a solution that I have. Now, to be fair, the sales teams often had already solved those things themselves and got through it because they're great at negotiating. When they were about to blow their top because they'd failed at that and it hadn't worked, that's when they came to me. So a little bit of a different way of dealing with it. Technical people want to learn skills. Salespeople want to be inspired. If you go to any salesperson, you say, what do you do to practice their craft? They'll probably say something like, I do my job. You go to a technical person and they're like, oh, I did these labs. I learned this. I read this book. I did this thing. So it's interesting to see the difference in development models. What I really need to do is just inspire people that it's possible and give them the tools to go inspire their customers. That's what salespeople need. Technical people, they need to feel confident about the solution. They need to feel confident about the capabilities that we're offering and how we're doing it. Just a different level. Like, you do a great sales pitch, give it to the salesperson, they'll go repeat it and sell it everywhere. Do a great sales pitch to a technical person, they're going to say, but how does it work?
Exactly. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. I don't understand how that works.
That's so funny. You talked a lot about your values as a manager, the things you wanted to convey to your team. Those all sound to me like elements of a team culture. What are some of the ways that you have found to build a positive team culture, not only when you're first starting, but throughout the journey and even during times of uncertainty like a pandemic, for example?
I can almost reverse that question to you since you were a member of that culture, but I'm going to avoid doing that because you asked the question first. Peter Wernstrom, who is a researcher for many years, he created a culture indicator. Specifically, he talked about culture is set by the first level manager and their preoccupation. And he defined that there are 3 preoccupations for first line managers. They are preoccupied with power and gaining more of it. They are preoccupied with rules and following them, or they're preoccupied with the mission of the company and achieving it. These 3 different structures or cultures are directly reflect how easily information flows. So if you think about a startup, they're very mission-based. They all have a mission. They all want to achieve that mission. They all want to get to the end of that mission, right?
Yep.
It's easy. We have this thing that we're deeply passionate about and we want to sell it. Communication, CEO to the janitor talk to each other regularly. No problem at all. Everybody gets it. Everybody could be a salesperson. Everybody can be marketing. Everybody is everything. It's a mission-based organization. Then you get into the rules-based organization. And the easiest example would be the US military. They have rules for how much water you need to drink, what time you need to go to the bathroom, what time you need to eat food, what you do every day, how many push-ups and sit-ups you do, all that stuff. And they operate on rules, which allows for consistency of operation and wide scale. Every captain of every boat in the sea knows exactly what they're supposed to do and where their orders are supposed to come from. It's a very good structure for executing the same everywhere. For those that don't handle deadly weapons, I'm thankful that they have a structure like that, right?
For sure.
And the last structure is the one that we see most often in corporate America, which is a manager who's preoccupied with how do I become my boss? And so when I talk about those 3 things, I have found that basically companies spend a lot of time building culture. You know, they have these culture retreats. They have all this stuff that they're doing. They have all these groups for various people and stuff like that. I'm not going to get into specifics, but they have all these things that they do to try to promote their culture. None of that matters if your boss is preoccupied with getting their next job, because that culture does not exist for you under that structure. Yes, the rest of the company had that, you don't. The interesting challenge is, yes, CEOs can set culture, but I wish more companies would spend more time ensuring that they have healthy culture at the first line manager level, because that's where it really matters. And the problem is the mission, the culture of the company, rarely becomes the mission of the individual managers, especially in larger corporations, because of the preoccupation with power or the desire to follow the rules. You know, I believe that when I was a first line manager, that was the best place to establish culture. And that culture existed in my team and couldn't go wider than that.
Do you think when you have the manager that's preoccupied with power and getting to the next level, do you think it's that they want the title and the accolades that come with that? Because it sounds like it might be more that than they want to expand their culture wider.
It is selfish, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
Individual motivation, I can't speak to it, but power-based culture is based on I control the information. I am the only source of information. It's an I scenario, so it is very selfish. As to why they do that, some of them do it because they're afraid, right?
Yep.
Some of them do it because it's the only way that they've ever known. Some of them do it because they think it's the best way to gain the next job, and that's what they're only interested in. You know, some people become disenfranchised with corporations and the way that corporations lay off people and do other things that they just decide, hey, I want to only do that. But look, individual motivation is individual. It's about preoccupation. If you have a manager that's only preoccupied with making themselves look good, it's pretty obvious to you pretty quickly. And you're just going to hope they go away eventually. Can't wait till you get promoted. Have fun with that.
Was it easy to understand from peers that you worked with who were managers as to which ones cared more about the culture versus more about the power? Like, were you able to learn from some of the things that they were doing or analyze them from afar and go, yeah, they might not care so much about team culture?
Yes, you can observe it. I was thankful that I was surrounded by really good people that were mostly focused on the mission of the company and creating really good cultures for their teams. I didn't observe a lot of negative cultures in my direct sphere of peers. In fact, I didn't observe it at all, frankly. A lot of that is because our manager at the time, at that first round of hiring, was incredible at building that culture. So that was the preoccupation of that manager. And it became obvious in the people that she was hiring. This is where it does matter, is the preoccupation, as a first-line manager, my boss's preoccupation also affects my experience.
Of course. Yeah.
Same thing, just one level higher. It doesn't matter, but every level creates its culture. Are we a collaborative culture that we're working together to try to win together, or are we in competition against each other for who can do best?
And I don't actually think we defined the term culture, Joseph. How do you define it? Like team culture?
Preoccupation with something. What are we preoccupied with? What are you preoccupied with every day? That's your real culture. We have lots of things that we profess to be culture, but when you sit down and you don't have anything else you have to do, what do? You'll figure out what your culture is pretty quick. Might be Facebook.
Yeah, it might be.
Right?
It might be. Yeah.
If you sit down and you think, man, I just can't wait to do something of service to somebody else, and you get up and you start doing some service, I've certainly seen people that do that. What is your preoccupation when you don't have to do anything else? It's an interesting question that we all have to ask ourselves. Ultimately, I think we spend a lot of time worrying about culture. I hear that a lot in hiring practices, right? And I think there are good companies and bad companies. I think there's companies that have a top level preoccupation with making money and that's all they care about. And I think there's companies that have a top level preoccupation with selling products, but doing right by their customers and trying to do the right thing for the world that we live in. And I think that's the kind of culture people are talking about, because it's very hard to be a great manager in a terrible top level culture. That's the other side of this, right? Is I think the term is, what are we experiencing in our local area is one thing. What do we have above us that's creating an overarching pressure on that? It's very hard. If you're in a highly rules-based organization like the Army, trying to build a culture of mission-based focus can be challenging. By the way, if you get a chance, Mike Abenoff, who wrote 2 books, This Is My Ship and This Is Our Ship, talks about that exact concept and how he totally revolutionized the Navy and one of the worst performing ships in the Navy by changing the culture to a mission-based culture while following the rules, because he took down all of the preconceived rules and only went to what was in the regulations. A simple example that he talks about in his book, and I highly recommend it, they're great books, is on Sunday, on every ship in the Navy, there is a meal with the crew. And what happens is the cook puts all the meal out on the back deck of the ship. He was on an Arleigh Burke destroyer, to be clear. And they put the meal out there and they line up and get the food. And the officers are on the upper deck and the enlisted are down on the lower deck. And what happens is the officers, when they come, they button line and get their food and go up. Captain Avanoff saw this happening, watched his officers do it, and then he went to the front of the line in front of everybody, went around the other side of the table and started handing plates to the enlisted officers. He was the last person to get his food on that first Sunday on the boat. There's nothing in the rules or regulations that says he has to do it, but it has been standing tradition for 100 years that that's the way you do it on the boat, is you just button line and get your food because you're an officer as a sign of respect. Instead, he chose to change the culture to, I respect you for what you do.
That's really cool.
Just a great book to read, by the way. Incredible amount of examples. He lectures now about how to change culture at the top level, and that's a rules-based organization that became mission-based.
Should the person who is seeking to possibly become a manager think about their opportunity to impact the culture of the team a little bit more when making the decision as to whether or not they do it? Would that tip the scales for somebody to be like, okay, yeah.
I think if I understand your question, you're asking me if somebody is passionate about changing the culture, should they consider management?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're asking?
Yes. I think that's a good form of the question I was trying to ask.
How about the inverse? If you're considering being a manager, you should think about what kind of manager you want to be. And you should probably base it on an investigation of the managers you most like working for and the ones you have not liked working for, and figure out what those differences are. I remember a discussion with a friend of mine who was one of my first managers at VMware, not Josh, but a different one. And he had left the company. And I asked him the question, tell me what every good manager you've ever had has in common, and described a couple different behaviors. And I said, okay, tell me what every bad manager you've ever had has in common. And he described a couple of different behaviors. And for me, it's like, do more of the positive, don't do any of the negative. My 18-year-old daughter works at Taco Bell. She has a plethora of 21-year-old assistant managers that are in charge of the Taco Bell at various times. She gets a very good observation of what she likes in management and what she hates. And they're very raw and inexperienced managers, because the difference between what she makes an hour and the manager makes is 25 cents.
Oh.
So it's not exactly a highly sought after trained position, right? For a quarter more an hour. So if you think about it, we've all had those experiences. Think about the times when you've done the most work, when you've grown the most. You probably connect that generally with a really good manager. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's just a situation where you've been forced to grow by discomfort, which also happens. But I prefer to grow by comfort, feeling trusted.
Yeah.
So I guess my answer to the question is, should you think that you want to change the culture and that's why you should become a manager? Teams have their own culture with them as well. Some teams have a culture of cutthroat, let's win no matter what individually. Some of them want to help each other out. And it's going to take time to change one culture to the other, and you can't get too frustrated by that. Mike Abinoff didn't fix the boat in 1 week. It took him 9 months.
Should people also be thinking about the extra time and effort that could come with being a people manager? You know, you talked about the boss you had who always had time to take your call. So if you're going to do it that way, it sounds to me like you need to prepare yourself and your family and make sure you're in the right phase of life to spend perhaps more time at it than when you're an individual contributor.
Yeah. The great thing about Josh is that I discovered that it wasn't that he didn't have things scheduled over that time. It's that he just ignored them and told them he would deal with it later, right? He just pushed it off for the prioritization. I'm going to tell a story that I think I told last time, but I think it's an important story to share, right? Years ago, when I was working at IBM, I was a consultant with a large multi-tenant service provider. And so I worked for IBM, but I pseudo-reported to somebody who worked for the company. And at one point, my wife came in to have lunch with me. Everyone's like, oh, you should bring her in to introduce us. So I introduced my wife to everyone, and she was sitting there with the person that I pseudo-reported to. And she said, it must be hard being married to him because he must work crazy hours and bring his work home with him every day. And my wife just looked at her and she's like, he's never brought his work home. And she's like, you're kidding me, right? And she's like, no, he just works at the office and then he drives home and listens to NPR and he's done. And if you call him because there's an outage, then he gets on the computer and fixes it, of course. But that only happens like once or twice a year. We, especially since COVID, have consistently allowed our lives to blend.
Yeah.
There was occasional times where I was working past 5 o'clock, Nick, as a manager.
Of course.
Mostly when I was doing dinners and other things like that. Or if there was a total meltdown problem.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you over 3 years, the total number of total meltdown problems are less than 10. Now, dinner's different situation, right?
Of course.
That's part of sales.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I was off at 4 every day or 5. 5 at the latest. You know as well as I do, 4 to 5 is always blocked on my calendar for cleanup.
Yep.
I worked till 5, but I was off with phone calls and everything else at 4, and I just denied stuff between 4 and 5 unless it was critical. And occasionally there was an emergency that took place during that time. You and I have talked during that time, right? We experienced that. But that was something I blocked on my calendar every single day so that I could just tie up business and be done when I'm done at 5. I think that we get way more done when we give ourselves limits, when we have balance. If you remember the last conversation we had, it was about VCDX and how I got it done an hour at a time every day by just putting 1 extra hour on my workday. And it took me 9 months to get it done. I'm a firm believer that we've got to create boundaries so that we allow for the things to happen that need to happen in our lives. And when those boundaries become blurred, we produce far less. We are less sharp, we're less available, we're less there. We do not get more done by more hours. We get less done. Just my perspective on that whole conversation of like making time. Josh made time by saying, you know what? That forecast call, not the most important thing right now. I'll catch up later. Can't make it. I did that a lot. Most important thing, push it off. The only caveat I had to that is I did not do that to customers.
Yeah.
And you remember my mantra when I was a manager in sales. Customers come first. More important than any regularly scheduled call, more important than anything else. If you've got a meeting with your customer, take care of them.
Yep.
Same thing for me. But that's the top of the mountain. We don't sell anything without customers. So for us, the top of the mountain to make quota was customers.
Yes. For people thinking about going into leadership, hopefully they can set the boundaries as you talked about, set the limits, but also find a way to model that they're doing that for their team.
Did I do that well or not?
You did that well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I finally hit you with the reverse question. I had to.
There was an instance where you basically had to tell me, listen, if it's a company holiday, you don't need to work. I don't care what needs to be done. You don't need to work. And if it's an emergency, you should call me and I'll do it. And I never forgot that.
Well, I appreciate that there's a story, at least from my experience working with you, that stuck with you. I think that's a good one. I do think we will wake up after 40 years of working and ask ourselves a question of who we become. And I hope we like the answer. My answer is not going to be I've become a great sales leader. My answer is going to be the person, the character that I've developed. And part of that is learning to balance the priorities. I've got kids, I've got family, I've got chickens, I've got all kinds of stuff going on in my life, right?
Can't forget the chickens.
The challenging thing that we look at in our lives is balancing those things. And it does help when we are the same person at work as we are at home.
Same person meaning same behaviors, same values, same character, all the things.
Yes. I think that there are times where we're tempted to do things that are outside of our values and character in our employment in order to get ahead. And I think those are very dangerous things. Be true to yourself. I'm a big fan of character. You know that, Nick.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're here to develop the character, not to market ourselves and become showy. And I encourage people to spend time thinking about the person they want to be at the end of those 40 years, because you don't want to be a 65-year-old retiree who doesn't like yourself. It's not a good place.
Well, listen, Joseph, I think that's pretty close to our mic drop moment here. So I want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me. Any parting thoughts on what we've talked about today for our listeners?
On the main topic of becoming a manager, I highly recommend that everybody strongly consider their motivation before they do it. It is easily one of the most thankless jobs you're going to have. When you're an individual contributor, there are behaviors and actions that you do that are easy to measure. You did a good job on that project. You did a good job selling that thing. You did a good job that. They're measurements. When you're a leader, it's abstracted to the point where it's harder to measure that. So if you're a person who needs those kind of kudos, it's very hard. I measured my success as a leader in how hard it was to lead that job. If it was hard for me, that means I did it right. If it was easy for me to lead the job, I didn't do it right. Think about that before you get into management, because we need great managers who are dedicated to lifting other people up. We don't need more managers that are dedicated to their careers. Just my opinion. Love to see more people that are lifting others up in this world. We need more of that. And as part of that, accepting the differences that people bring, because one of the things that I loved about my team was they were very different people, and I learned from their differences, and that's a good thing. How to find me? I'm on LinkedIn, Joseph Griffiths. Frankly, if you want to get a hold of me, Nick knows how to get a hold of me.
Yeah, happy to point you toward having a good conversation with Joseph. Joseph Griffiths, thank you so much for coming back and chatting with us.
Always a pleasure, Nick. Thanks for having me, and you have a great night.
You as well. Are you having regular one-on-ones with your manager? If you're not, that's probably a different topic for a different day as to what can be done about it. But if you are, how regular are those? Are they weekly? Are they bi-weekly? Are they a phone call? Some kind of video call? Or maybe they're in person even. Are we approaching those discussions mindfully and giving ourselves a little bit of time to think about what we'd like to talk to our manager about beforehand? Especially if you're part of a large team, you want to be very clear on the topics you bring up in the one-on-one with your manager, because you might have limited time and attention from that manager. So could you write down 3 things, 3 topics you'd like to talk about with your manager during the time that you have? Maybe you take 5-10 minutes like Joseph said. Maybe for you, it's more like 15 to 20. If you're not used to doing this, it might take a little bit longer to think through what to bring up. It's also a time to bring ideas. Maybe you have an idea for a way to do something differently or a new project that you'd like to take on. That discussion time with your manager can help you determine whether that's actually valuable to the team and the overall organization. And even if they say it's not, at least you'll know. You'll either know that it's not valuable, or maybe you haven't articulated the value in the right way, and the manager can help you do that if they think the overall high-level idea has value. For me personally, I like to take notes during one-on-ones with my manager or my skip-level manager if I can, because sometimes I want to remember a response they gave me or a perspective they had on a particular challenge that I might be having. Maybe that's just me, but if you're a note taker, I would take some notes. Did you hear what Joseph said about the second line manager who was the one hiring all the first line managers that built a great team culture? This really aligns with the discussion we had with Leanne Elliott back in episode 238 about managers being culture keepers. A lot of our discussion with Joseph certainly demonstrated that they are. If you're listening to this and you think you want to be a manager someday, Joseph said that we should think back to the actions and behaviors of both the good and not so good managers we've had. He even talked about going and asking other people to get their input. If you were to think about it on your own and then ask 4 or 5 people, I imagine you would have a very good list of what good managers look like and what not so good managers look like. Maybe you can use that to determine the type of manager you want to be, the type of character you would like to build, and it'll help you understand a little bit more as to whether you're doing it or approaching this role for the right reasons. If you want a couple of episodes to go back to on what good managers do or what they look like, go back to episode 115 with Jeff Eberhard. That's a great one that I like to reference. And then episode 138 with Don Jones about amplifying people's work and developing those people. I really hope you enjoyed these discussions with Joseph. And honestly, I would love to hear what some of the actions and behaviors of the best managers you've ever had are. If there's something you'd like to share with us, we'd be happy to read that on the air. Send us an email, nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And if this was a helpful discussion, be sure to rate us 5 stars and consider writing a review on Apple Podcasts. May you be blessed to have as many great managers in your career as possible. We'll see you next week.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at Network Nerd _ signing off.
Adios.